Hi, how you doing? Mike Sorensen here with another encouragement. For those of you that are out there doing the day-to-day nitty-gritty work of doing community well, I mean, you guys are the body of Christ. This is where it happens. So I salute you, first of all, because, a lot of people look at staff members as if we are the primary people doing ministry, but honestly, we're facilitating that. We may be setting up systems for you, but you guys that are out there doing small groups, that are leading these clusters of community, you're the ones really doing a lot of the shepherding, a lot of the heavy lifting of showing up when someone needs help. So I really just appreciate you today and thank you for all that you're doing, because it's been a lot more work and a lot more difficult and a lot more stressful to do that because people are going through more and all that during this time. So, thank you for all of the work that you're doing, because it's just amazing to see how God is working in the midst of that. And, I want to talk a little about that disruption today. We've all been disrupted, and it just messes up everything we're trying to do. I'm immersed in that world with being in the church. We're talking all the time just how much different everything is. All of the normal ways of operating aren't working. And so I want to talk a little bit about how God works in the midst of that often this is how God births new movements, or how God accomplishes his work. And so if we will embrace this, we actually can see him work. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit. So I love the book of Acts, and I go back to it regularly. It's something I've been kind of immersed in a lot the last couple of years especially. And when I look in the book of Acts, there's a statement at the beginning in Acts 1:8, right? Jesus' last thing in Acts before we go into the apostles, one of the last things Jesus says to them is he gives them this commission. He says, you're my witnesses, you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. So they are going to bear witness to him. And then the rest of the book is playing that out as the church grows from this little cluster of disciples after Jesus' resurrection into this kind of worldwide movement. And so you get to kind of follow that story when you go through the book of Acts. So when you look at that piece, when he says, you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth, how does he do that? Well, one of the key things that you see, that thread that runs through the book of Acts, is that disruption and stress and persecution and things like that are often the drivers God uses. So if we take that Acts 1:8 passage, we fast forward several chapters. Right after, in chapter 7, you hear this speech from Stephen, one of the early disciples, who gets up and gives this very vocal speech. Very harsh, but really powerful, kind of prophetic speech in Jerusalem. And then he is stoned to death at the end of chapter 7. So as we pivot in chapter 8, there's this pivot. And so chapter 8, verse 1 of the book of Acts, it says, Saul was in hearty agreement with putting him to death. And on that day, a great persecution began against the church in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. So with this little statement that it's easy to just kind of pass on by, because it sounds like just, okay, here's what's happening, and you move on to the next thing. You could easily just zip right by that verse. But there's two very important things that are being introduced. The author of Acts is very much, the Apostle Luke is very much hinting at some things here he wants you to notice. Number one, he's subtly introducing Saul, who's going to be very important. Saul becomes Paul on the road to Damascus about a chapter later. But he's also introducing this little tidbit. He's kind of leaving you a little hint when he says that they were scattered. If you notice that same phrase, throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, he's letting you know, not just they were scattered because of persecution, he's letting you know that this is accomplishing the thing that Jesus said in chapter 1. The very thing that Jesus said he was going to do, he's doing now. But he's not doing it through some, wow, amazing speech that someone gave and a bunch of new people were excited about it and they carried that message on to these areas. It wasn't that. How a big part of why the gospel began to spread in these regions outside of Jerusalem, because Judea and Samaria were kind of the regions outside of that, is the big part of the reason that spread was because God scattered those people out there with the persecution that happened after Stephen. And one of the main drivers of that was Saul, who became Paul, who ends up being another driver of that. So one of the things you see in that, it's uncomfortable, but it's that discomfort, that disruption, and all of that persecution was a big vehicle for God to spread his gospel in a much bigger way. When he got ready to go, everybody was really comfortable. And you see some of these chapters in between 1 and 8, you're seeing the church just thriving and doing amazing things. And there's all this just fervor of like, wow, this is amazing. Look what God's doing in people's lives, and people are getting healed, and they're all sharing with one another. There's so much unity. And so there's all this exciting growth happening. And then all of a sudden with Stephen and this persecution that breaks out, it just all came to a stop. Well, I think all of us living in 2020 know, maybe not the persecution side of that. We're not having our lives threatened in the same way that they were at that time. None of us have been killed for our faith here in America, but we all know what it's like to have this huge event happen, and all of a sudden everything is different, and we can't do anything the way we used to. And, some of us are scattered. Some of us are at home when we're used to being out. Some of us are not able to go visit people we would normally visit, or the people that normally come to our group aren't coming anymore. And, everything is messed up, and there's stuff I can't do, stuff I can't acquire, and everything is just more difficult right now with a pandemic going on and all that we've been through in 2020. But what I want you to see, it I'm sure did not feel like this great epic movement of God, like, oh, he's fulfilling his prophecies, when Stephen got persecuted, when their lives were being threatened, and they had to flee for their lives and leave Jerusalem, all the safety of the believers that they knew there. They had this great community that was all supporting and encouraging one another. And then for fear of their life, they have to just run and go to these outlying areas and find a friend or a family, or there's somebody that they could stay with in Saling area, just to flee and hide out so that they don't get killed for their faith. I'm sure did not feel like victory at that time, just like 2020 often doesn't feel like victory for us. But the truth is, in the midst of that, God was birthing something new. He was doing something profound. There was a huge shift happening during these chapters of Acts, during that time period in history. So we're living in one of those now that, if we will embrace it, oftentimes this is what God is doing too in our time. And so if God's birthing a new thing, he's doing a new ministry, he's doing a change. Sometimes you have to tear down before you build back up. So a lot of us are experiencing some of that tearing down right now. So if you're experiencing that in your group, to get practical, down to earth, and not kind of this big picture stuff, in a small group, sometimes you have people that leave, and you're wondering, what are we going to do? Oh, now we're smaller. Well, what does that mean? Well, that might be us pivoting into God's calling us to go out and find some new people, or shift some of what we do. Or you also there comes a time where we're too big and we need to split off, or we need to really launch somebody into a new ministry that they need to go to. Later on, you see later in Acts, you see the church at Antioch that had Saul and Barnabas as their basically founding elders, that get called away, and God says, I want Paul and Barnabas to be my missionaries to go out. And now the church at Antioch, it's great for Paul and Barnabas, but the church at Antioch kind of gets stuck in this, well, what about us kind of thing. So when we look at those things, God often works in these really disruptive ways. And the question is not, we could grumble and we could complain about it, and we can get just frustrated that nothing works, and it was going so well, and it was so exciting, and then here got all messed up. But this is what God often does. He builds it up, and then he'll break it up and scatter it out somewhere. And so when we stop and look at that, when you run into that phase, embrace it. I mean, that's the biggest thing, is stop and say, okay, there's a bad side to this, there's a frustrating, and we can grumble for a little bit. But then after we're done with that, there's a time to stop and say, all right, but what is God doing? He is also awesomely doing something very powerful right now. God may be working in a really new way. Let's look for that. Let's start to look for the hand of God in the midst of this and what he might be doing, because he might be birthing somebody new. There might be someone in our group that's they're ready to do their own thing. They're ready to launch, and we need to help them do that. Or we need to actually focus our some new energy on a new mission that we need to be focused on. We need to reach out to some new people, or we need to have a new kind of purpose, and we need to reevaluate that right now. We need to encourage each other through some stuff. We're hey, it's calling us to step up and support one another in a new way. suffering always comes with it some new purpose and things that God's doing. We don't always know what that is, but if we'll embrace it and say, okay, God, I trust you're taking us through this for some reason. I want to know what it is. And we don't get flustered by it. We just walk into it and say, all right, let's see what this is. I encourage you just to stick with it. Persevere in the midst of it, that there is an end, but not just an end to go back to the way it was before. We don't want to just wait out the clock. Look for something new that God is doing, because He is birthing new things. We're seeing it in ministry all the time right now. So look for it. And even right now, while it's frustrating and stressful and feels like a big setback, look for it. God's doing something new and exciting. And I don't know about you, but I want to be a part of that. When I see that God's doing something new and He's breaking up the ground and ready to launch, I want to go with Him. So I think it's exciting. If that's happening in your group too, get help figuring it out, right? Like, give me a call, shoot me an email, and let me know, because I would love to walk through that. It's exciting to stop and see where God might be working. So I'm happy to help you walk through that process too, if I can. So I hope everybody is having a great Thanksgiving week and having a great holiday season. I know it's a little different this year, but we're still blessed and have much to be thankful for. So hopefully we can talk soon. Take care. Bye-bye.